I met him in the swamp down in Dagobah, where it Oh, hello ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni-Viewer. Hopefully the sound in here isn't too bad. I am still setting this area up. But I wanted to take a little moment to talk about Star Wars The Force Awakens, as I finally got to see it over the weekend. And I'm issuing my spoiler warning right now. I'm going to spoil the heck out of this movie, because there's a lot I want to say, and it needs to have spoilers as part of it. So if you want to avoid spoilers, turn back now. Otherwise, let us continue. Now, let me tell you where I'm coming from. I am a casual Star Wars fan. I like the original trilogy well enough. There was a time when I was obsessed with it as a little kid. Well, I was never really little, but younger. And I've mellowed out over the years. I'm no longer crazy about it. Even the time I was crazy about it was a very brief period. But I like it well enough. It's an important part of cinematic history, but I'm not obsessed with it. I don't think the original trilogy is the greatest thing ever, and I don't think the prequels are the worst thing ever, the way so many other people do. So just keep that in mind. I'm speaking as someone who is not obsessed with it. So, ever get a sense of deja vu? Because I'm starting to feel that way a little. I remember how many people wanted so badly to believe that Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, was a good movie that they were actively convincing themselves that it was. You'll find a lot of really positive reviews out there from when it first came out. But it took us a little while to admit that, in actuality, it was a bad movie. And I get the feeling that's going to happen again. See, I was very disappointed by The Force Awakens. Even speaking as a casual fan, I was severely disappointed by it. Now, that's not to say it's awful, and I can already see some of you going, oh great, he's going to be just an arbitrary contrarian, he's going to be ranting on something I like. Please, I get where you're coming from. I have also been in a position where I didn't want to listen to some pompous windbag on the internet talk about something that they hated, which I liked. But I'm sorry. It's a fact that's going to, well, I won't say fact. This is review. It's entirely subjective, but believe me when I tell you, there is going to be a backlash against this movie like you have never seen before. And I am going to be far nicer about it than the people who will follow me. And trust me, people will follow me on this. So you may as well get a softer blow now before the real tirades begin. So I've been trying to figure out, I wanted to actually do this a day earlier, but I needed that day to actually figure things out a little, process it all. And I could go on about all sorts of things, like how Maz's cantina scene was completely pointless, how the Nazi symbolism from that one scene on Starkiller Base was too over the top, even for Star Wars. How they deliberately ended on a non-ending with one of the most awkward scenes I have ever seen in a movie. But there will be plenty of people who come that will do that for me. You see, I've realized that there's one single thing that really drags this movie down. And that is the fact that it is the exact same movie as A New Hope. Pretty much literally. They rearrange a couple scenes, make alterations to a couple of characters, but otherwise, it is the exact same movie. You have a droid carrying something that is vital, that winds up on a desert planet with a protagonist who is waiting for something. That protagonist, the droid, and another companion leave on the Millennium Falcon from that desert planet, join up with Han Solo and Chewbacca, eventually wind up on a forest planet where the resistance movement is going to launch X-Wings to destroy the giant spherical cannon that can destroy planets, that is run by the evil order full of stormtroopers. And then at the end, it's the same movie. And that in and of itself is not necessarily what's bad. There are plenty of movies out there that have the same plot. Iron Man 3 and The Wolverine have the exact same plot, but they do it differently enough that, you can look at them and say, okay, these are two good movies telling the same story in a different way. With The Force Awakens, it feels more like they're just trying to be an imitation. It's like they're playing it safe. They don't want to try something new, so they're going with what they know everybody likes. And that is a problem. For me, certainly, but it should be a problem for everyone else, because otherwise this will become a trend. And it's kind of surprising that they decided to play it safe with a Star Wars movie. I mean, it's a Star Wars movie. There is no safer bet you can make than to say that a Star Wars movie will make millions of dollars. Come on. Slapping the name Star Wars on something is so close to the actual act of printing money that I'm amazed the United States government hasn't stepped in and called it a form of counterfeiting. So, you technically could have done anything with this movie. You could have told an original story. But they didn't. And they just retreaded the original film, rearranged a couple scenes, and that's all it wanted to be. It has no aspirations to be its own entity. It wants to be something else, something that came before it. And yet somehow it also seems convinced that it could never possibly measure up to what it's trying to imitate. So it's very confused in that regard. Wow, my subscriber count is dropping already, but I have to stay focused. You see, the fact is, this was a missed opportunity. That is what's bothering me. I know for a fact that we can tell all sorts of great original stories in the Star Wars universe without having to just retread the original movies. And do you know why? Because we have decades worth of material, from books to comics to animated series to video games and all sorts of crazy things, all of which are set in the Star Wars universe and all of which try to do their own thing. Some of them are even fan works. There are plenty of fan works out there which just are set in the Star Wars universe but tell their own stories. And there's hundreds of them. You couldn't possibly experience all of them at once. And yes, there's a lot of garbage out there, but you can still know the good ones by now. There are plenty of reviews out there telling you which are the good ones, which are the bad ones. You've got the Thrawn trilogy, you've got Rebel Assault, maybe that's just nostalgia for me. You've got all sorts of really good stories out there that you can say aren't just pale imitations. But The Force Awakens will come to be known as a pale imitation because that's exactly what it is. No one seems to be acknowledging that though. They're all just so ecstatic that it's not a disaster that they're not realizing that they're basically telling Disney and Lucasfilms and J.J. Abrams that they don't care if the movies are retreads or not. They don't care if we're actually getting new content. Okay, let me draw a little comparison for you here. There's a new Looney Tunes series that's been airing since October, I believe it was, sometime in the fall, called Wabbit. And it's going on the idea that it's a back-to-basics Looney Tunes show. It's not going for a particular setting or an overarching plot line or anything. It's just going on the idea that all you need to tell a good Looney Tunes short is to have Bugs Bunny, give him a foil of some sort, and see how they interact. That's it. And it's not perfect. I want to be very clear. It is very, very hit and miss. But Wabbit has not done two things so far. First, they have not ever once had Bugs Bunny turn to the camera and say, You know, I wish they still had Mel Blanc doing my voice and not this hackjob schlub they hired to replace him. And also, they've never once tried to recreate What's Opera Doc, or Rabbit Seasoning, or Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century. Daffy isn't even in the show yet, but what I'm saying is, they haven't tried to recreate the old shorts. They're trying to do new material. In the style of the original, certainly, but new stuff. And thus, it is forging its own identity. And again, I want to emphasize, it is a show of high peaks and deep valleys, very hit and miss. There are some that are good, there are some that are awful, but it's still doing its own thing. It's respecting the past without dwelling on it. And ultimately, I'd say Wabbit has a lot of respect for me in that regard, because it is trying to forge its own identity. Whereas The Force Awakens desperately wants to have another identity that it simultaneously believes it can embrace, yet doesn't think it can actually live up to. In fact, I think the villain, Kylo Ren, and here's where the big spoilers come in, he actually embodies the problem with the movie all in himself. He is someone who is so obsessed with what came before him that he desperately wants to be exactly like it, and yet is doubting that he can actually make it. But he's still trying, but he doesn't believe he can make it, but he's still trying. And so he winds up being a pale imitation either way. And not just because it's very clear that he's been wearing that mask too long. He should have kept the freaking mask on. But that's ultimately it. Star Wars The Force Awakens doesn't have its own identity. It has A New Hope's identity, and just barely at that, doing it well. And the reason I think we need to actually acknowledge this is that if we don't, this will keep happening. I mean, let's be clear here. J.J. Abrams has done this before. Star Trek 2009, that also shares a lot of plot elements with A New Hope. He is that obsessed with remaking that movie. But what he should be doing is trying to tell his own story. And he didn't. And by The Force Awakens becoming such a success with so many positive reviews right out of the gate, what we're basically saying to Disney and Lucasfilms is that we don't care. We don't care if all we're getting is retreads. That's a bad thing. Because otherwise, trust me on this, Star Wars will fizzle out quickly if this becomes a trend. So you don't want that. If you're a Star Wars fan watching this, you don't want Star Wars to become hated again. So I think we really need to acknowledge the flaws here. They're good. There's good stuff in it. The special effects were amazing. I cannot honestly tell you where the CGI begins and the practical effects end. Invert that, and it's actually what I wanted to say, where the practical ends and the CGI begins. Other than because I know that they can't possibly get certain shots with just practical effects. So the special effects are good. There were no bad performances. Even the worst actor in the whole bunch, which I don't even know if there was a worst actor, but they all acquit themselves. And the music was good, though there aren't any really standout themes like the Imperial March or Duel of the Fates. But there's still that fact that this movie is not trying to be its own thing. It's just a little kid playing dress-up in the long run. And I'm sorry, everyone. The Force Awakens is not going to age well. This is going to be the Phantom Menace all over again. People are going to be really excited that it exists, and then they are going to come down hard on it when they realize it was actually not as good as they thought it was. I'm sorry to be the bearer of that bad news, but it is the truth. At least I think it is from where I stand. Time will tell if people agree with me or not. Well, I just ruined your day. If you're a Star Wars fan, at least. I guess I should probably go back to doing more of my scripted stuff and getting this place properly set for the year 2016. So, until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni-Viewer signing off. My, this here Anakin guy.